what would you think of a doctor who put a gym into their clinic?
Well, I think that I think they'd be pressier. Um, when you look at what affects people from an illness perspective, so much derives from lifestyle, and obviously a key part of lifestyle is movement. So, um, healthier muscles means healthier people. So, a gym in a clinic makes total sense to me.
All right. Well, I asked that question because you put a gym in your clinic, but listeners, welcome to How It's Met, the podcast where we chat with people who are shaping the future of health tech and healthcare. This time around, we have the absolute legend, Dr. Brendan Byrne, currently medical director and co-founder of the Wellness Garage, and also leading a new initiative that we're going to highlight at the end of this conversation, but also the creator of so many more amazing ventures. Brendan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. It's been a good week, and looking forward to a weekend though.
Yeah, you're going for your run soon. And we talked a little bit about the paths in Vancouver, which I miss very much right now. But that's not the topic of this conversation. The topic of this conversation is about you. And you started your, I guess, career and the trajectory as to where you are now by going to Yale and McGill. Tell us a bit about how that all started and how things came together to meld your passions in entrepreneurship and medicine.
Okay. That's going way, way back because I'm old. Way back. um, I ran track in high school and was a decent track runner, and so I got the opportunity to run for Yale and do that whole Ivy League thing, which is a really amazing experience. And I loved that. I studied neurobiology when I was at Yale, and I think I always thought I was going to go into medicine. So when it came time to apply, coming back to Canada and going to McGill made a ton of sense. Uh, did that, and in my McGill years, I thought I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon, and which is kind of funny because I'm not very handy with, I'm not very good with my hands, so I don't know what I was thinking, but I kind of got on that path. I think it was because I was a runner, and I thought, runners like always, become orthopods, and that made sense. But
That
um,
tracks.
kind of at the last minute, I redirected and kind of realized I was a generalist, and came out to BC, did a rotating internship back when you could just do those and get licensed and start practicing. So um, I did that, and I thought I would eventually go back and specialize, but very quickly after I finished my training, I got this crazy idea that gee, we spend so much time gathering information in medicine. And at that time we were storing it on paper charts with illegible handwriting. I thought, there's technology that could solve this. And so I bought myself a computer, taught myself to program, bought myself a medical practice, and started creating software. And eventually that actually became a company. And that was kind of a whole detour that I hadn't planned on, but was really quite rewarding in so many respects.
Talking about detours, we mentioned off the air that your path, I guess, to decide against orthopedic surgery really wasn't that smooth. What stops and starts did you have there?
Yeah, so it was interesting because when I was pursuing orthopedics, you couldn't go directly into the Canadian match, right? So you'd have to do, I think, a general surgery year at that point. I think, and so I was gung ho. Knew I wanted to do orthopedics, so I went down and I did all these electives down in the States, and I got really fixed on two places. I wanted to go to Stanford or University of Washington. I thought they were the two best programs at the time, and I got fixated on this, and then I found I was ranked 13th on Stanford's list, and I think like 15th or 20th on UW's list, and each of them
Mm,
took like 3 or 4 residents, and I realized I
Thanks.
wasn't going to get into either of them, and it made me really question what I was doing, because I realized I was actually I was so disappointed by that, even though other programs had told me that they'd rank me high enough that I'd get in. I realized I was chasing a prize and not necessarily chasing, what I wanted to do. So it kind of shook me, and that was when I put in for the rotating internship. completely out of the blue. At that point, when you got matched in Canada, you got pulled out of the US match. And so, it was, I think, bewildering to some of my friends because all they heard me talk about was orthopedics. And then the next thing they just know I'm doing a rotating internship in New Westminster, BC. But it was great. I actually realized when I got there, I realized right away, I'm a generalist. I like to know something about a lot of things. And so, it was kind of a way. There was clearly something in me that kind of realized I was pushing myself in a direction that didn't completely fit. Um, I mean, I've got high school kids that are just going into university right now, and I see so many people push themselves for things that might not be the fit for them. Um, and so I'm always kind of saying, like, life gives you some twists and turns, you often find the right place for yourself over time, even if you have a few, false starts, or I don't even think they're false starts. I think, you go down one path, you learn something about yourself, but maybe it's, you learn that that's not you. But yeah, this was kind of interesting. It was, I joke that the universe has some plans for us. We just don't always know it.
That's certainly true. I've had my own twists and turns. But speaking of twists and turns, it's not exactly average to realize that paper charts can often be a nuisance and sometimes a hazard. And then to buy a practice and to write a piece of EMR software that gets bought out. So what twists and turns led you to Wolf Medical Systems, and how did that story?
Well, it was totally delusional, right? Like if you look at it, um, I mean, the origin story is actually kind of crazy. I was doing an ER shift, and back then in Vernon, they had this weird thing. It was Vernon, BC, so in the Okanagan. So you do a 4-hour shift, and then you bugger off for 8 hours and come back for another 4 hours. I think it was designed so that people could go skiing. So maybe it made sense, but when I went, I didn't bring my skis at that time. And so I found myself, I did the shift, and then I was like, I had nothing to do. And so I was so bored. I was in a London Drugs, and they had a little computer section. I was so bored. I somehow found myself looking at date books on databases. And all of a sudden I was like, wait a second, you know, you could model a clinical record in a database. And so I had no formal studying about this stuff. And I literally bought the book, and I went home, and I wrote a database schema before I even had the computer. I hadn't even, used a computer before. This is how old I am. So when I was in high school, there were no computers in our high school. When I got to Yale, the Mac came out in 84. I was at Yale 82 to 86. So the Mac came out in 84. So few people had Macs. They were ridiculous. Like they had no memory in them. So you had to have a floppy disk that you'd put the software program in, and then you'd take it out, and then you'd put it back. It was just really ridiculous. So 2 years after I left high school, they got a computer lab. 2 years after I left Yale, they networked the whole college. In medical school, we didn't touch a computer. And 2 years after I left medical school, they started putting stuff online. Like it just followed, right? And so I was kind of I think the last of the completely, pre-digital era. But my friends were all going into industries that were being changed by kind of early information technology. So it was kind of, and then maybe it's the benefit of going to a place like Yale, where you have people who go all over the place. And so I was always talking to them, and it was like, wow, medicine is such an information centric profession. Once we gather and look at the information, we don't do anything with it. Right. And so, it just kind of languishes in a chart, and we don't actually kind of do any interpretation. Now that it's all digitized, we're realizing, wow, you can do so much with it, the machine learning and AI that we're doing now. But back then it was, and so I really had this vision. What if you saw a person, and everything that you were kind of documenting could actually plug in with the rest of their history, and you could get some guidance around it? What I didn't know was, just how much work it would take to to digitize, help doctors to digitize their practices. And, it's that there's an expression, don't confuse a clear vision with a short distance. And so sometimes when you see stuff, you have no idea how long it's going to take, but, that turns out to be, it's probably a 2 generation, uh, you know, thing that, so you have to spend a first generation just digitizing all the records. And only now are you getting to a place where there's enough digital information that you actually can start to make sense of it. But back when I started, it was good that I was naive and delusional because, it was kind of, the, uh, very close after that, we launched Wolf Medical, the .com stuff was taking off, and there was a lot of venture capital for a lot of different initiatives. And if I'd known more about starting a company, I would have probably gone and raised a bunch of money. And I would have been out of business within 2 years because it took quite a while for doctors to embrace computers. It took some, government help. It took some funding, and so, when you're starting a venture, sometimes too much money at the beginning is actually not helpful. Um, for most of the other time, it's not enough money is not helpful.
So, I mean, so you started a company that I guess would have languished if you didn't, or if you did raise money. It took a long time. How long did you take for Wolf Medical to scale and be bought out?
So we started in '99, and I still was in my practice. And in
Yeah.
2001, we had 50 clinics using our software, predominantly using it for billing and scheduling and kind of administrative. Not many people had gone fully paperless at that point. But I left my practice in 2001 to go on full time with Wolf. Um, by 2005, 2006, we were doing about 3 million a year, about 20, 25 employees. We were technically profitable, although there was never any money. It just kind of went in the door, out the door. But it was actually going pretty well for a company that was bootstrapped, right? And then the government started getting involved, right? So BC committed $108 million for a program. Alberta committed a bunch of money. And it was kind of like, it's like the Zenco and good news, bad news. So good news, they committed this money, right? So it's like, my God, we're the number one vendor in BC. We're going to get all this money. Bad news is they're going to go through a procurement process that you might not get
Oh
picked.
boy.
And it took 34 months for the first dollar to flow from that program. So,
Oh,
that was bad news. Good news. We did get chosen. Some of our competitors didn't get chosen. So, we kind of survived that. But the bad news is we had to weather, uh, you know, in 34 months where nobody bought a system from us in BC. Fortunately, we were going in Alberta, so that kind of kept us going through that. Um, you know, Bad news, we had to build an infrastructure and move everything from, on-premise servers to, data centers, which took some money. So we had to raise, $4.5 million to do that. Good news, we were able to do that. Bad news is, we almost ran out of that money before we scaled. So it was incredibly difficult as we were navigating through it. And it was kind of like, you just learn kind of good news, bad news. It's all just news. You just have to deal with it. And, we start, things started to really click, kind of 2010, we went from almost a near death where we almost ran out of cash to finally being really profitable all within 6 months. And sales weren't the issue. It was just getting the cash through the company. And by 2011, we were finally kind of realizing that this was a great business. It was an early fast business. And we were profitable. And so from that point onwards, it was going to be quite a different story. Almost at the point of that kind of, realization, TELUS kind of knocked on our door and said they wanted to get into the space, and there's no dominant Canadian player. We were a leading company in Western Canada. So they proposed that they would buy our company and build their physician, EMR unit around our company. So So they bought it. I became a VP of what was Physician Solutions at that time. We went out and bought practice solutions from the Canadian Medical Association. And then we bought Quebec EMR. And so instantly we were a national player and had, leading market share. We did a few other acquisitions. I think I did 5 acquisitions in the 3 years that I ran
Wow.
that group. And then we combined it with the pharmacy group to call it Provider Solutions. So we were, we were about 600 people, 110 million in revenue when I was there. So it was quite an entity. And then I took 6 months, 6 months off and I, did a sabbatical with my family. We did a around the world trip. And that was kind of, I felt I had done my EMR stint at that point. So it was, when TELUS acquired us, I said, I want to give them 3 years. I committed to giving them 3 years. But I left. Well, I left on the sabbatical 3 years to the day that we were acquired. So, the neat part was that, the people at TELUS were great. Paul Lepage, who was my boss then, had, he was awesome because I had planned just to leave. And he's like, well, go on your sabbatical, come back as chief innovation officer. And so I came back and to TELUS for another couple of years as chief innovation officer. And that was really fun because I got to explore all the different, emerging technologies in health. And so, I first learned, I remember learning about deep learning, from Jeremy Howard lecture in 2015 and blown away by what was happening there, how these neural networks. And we did a startup program back then where we took 75 startups through a process we called First Step and really tried to see the world through the eyes of the startup and then bring some of that thinking back to TELUS as a company trying to scale these solutions. So it was a lot of fun.
How did your life that had the good news, bad news in a startup contrast or integrate with your experience in kind of a more corporate entity like TELUS? There must have been a huge difference there.
The most dangerous time was when we were growing fast because you had to hire people. You had to, at that point in the Alberta program, we actually had to buy all the hardware for the clinics and then we get paid back afterwards, right? Like it was this crazy thing. So, so everything could be going well, but you might not have cash in the bank. So you kind of constantly felt the sort of Damocles above your head. Like it was, you're constantly kind of waiting for something that could take you out.
Terrifying.
It was terrifying. So we lived and breathed as a small company, a startup, you live and breathe cash flow. And so the weirdest part of going into a company like TELUS is it's like cash doesn't exist, right? Like it just, there's a different finance department and infinite cash for things. There's different things that happen in big companies and there's different priorities and there's things that are completely outside and arbitrary to your business that get imposed upon you. And that was, I think, the hard part about being in a bigger company is when there's other things going on, there's kind of edicts that come down around spending or edicts that come down around hiring that have nothing to do with your business and make no sense to your business. And so, but you kind of have to roll with it. So that was really different, right? And particularly to saw myself as a corporate person. I mean, the only real employer I've had is TELUS, right? I've been self-employed all the way through and all the way since. So, I have nothing else to judge them by other than, there was a lot of process that didn't always make sense to the business unit that you had to navigate with. But the people there were first class and I mean, I was treated incredibly well by everybody. So I have nothing, but positive memories of doing that. And the other thing with a startup that, I joke that startups are like flying a plane, like launching. So, at first you're on the runway and, you're trying to get the thing moving, right? So, the first bit of momentum down the runway, you get all excited about, right? And then the first moment that your wheels take off an inch off the ground, you're excited about. And then you're flying a little bit, but you got to like clear the barn at the end of the runway, and you clear that, and then there's a mountain that you got to clear, and then you're flying along, and there's turbulence, and it's like, oh my God, are we going to crash this thing? And eventually, there's mountains that you got to avoid. But at a certain point, you got to land the plane, right? Because you have investors that came on, and we've been at it for a while, but we sold in 2012, and started the company in 1999. So I had investors that were with me for 12 years, right? And so so you got to land the plane, and in a way, when we sold, everyone got a job. So everybody there's no layoffs with our sale. All of our investors got at least a 4x return. So, that was the minimum. So everybody did well from a financial perspective. And we sold it to a group that wanted to build it. Right. And so it was a real, it was a real win to do that and kind of close that chapter and then start a new one.
Mhm. It seems like you really enjoyed your time both at TELUS and in the startup world overall. And I guess first step included, your life has gone in so many different directions after TELUS. And we won't have time to go through all the different steps and projects that you've taken on. But what stops, starts, and stories did you enjoy most about, I guess, during the process of finding your next chapter?
Well, so I mean, when I was chief innovation officer, what was great with that is I got really excited about medicine again, because there's all these wonderful things that are happening. I didn't see that from I was still practicing a day a week, but I was practicing at a local walk-in clinic. So, you don't really see, it doesn't feel very exciting from just the day to day there. So I started getting the itch that I wanted to start something again. And when we were on our sabbatical, my wife and I had really talked about, well, if you could build a clinic, if you could do anything and build a clinic, what would you build? Like, what would it look like? And what would it be like? And we came up with what we built with Wellness Garage, which was, it would be lifestyle medicine. And initially I thought it'd be lifestyle medicine using precision, health tools. So genomics and, molecular medicine. And it would be very personalized, and, the space would look like a gym. You'd have a plant-based cafe, and you'd have a meditation space. You'd put front and center that the drivers of health would be kind of part of the experience. And so we visualized that kind of when we were on sabbatical, and then it just kept growing, and that I have to do this when I was doing the innovation work. And I, part of it is you're talking to so many, startup founders, and it's infectious, right? So, okay, let's do this. And we set out to do it, and we kept it kind of, in a lot of ways, we kept the vision a bit too large and not focused enough. But part of that was to learn, right? And because I kind of also thought, it could be an incubator for something else. And it gave me, so I got back into practice, and I very quickly realized that I didn't need the molecular medicine tools and the genomics as much as, just a tape measure and a waist circumference would tell me, what's happening. Metabolic health is a disaster in North America. It's a disaster really in the world now. One out of 3 Canadians are diabetic or pre-diabetic. So it's astounding. And probably 70% have insulin resistance if you actually look, beyond kind of just glycemic control. So that became apparent to me. And but it took us a while to develop an approach. And we had health coaches and dietitians and exercise physiologists, physicians, and I was a psychologist. And so, kind of a whole team approach. And we started to create kind of, what are the elements, what's the clinical model here? What are the elements of change around this? How do you work with other groups? And it was very high touch at the beginning. And then COVID hit. And so we had the best family gym during COVID. So for $10,000 a month, we got to have our own family gym. The whole space, we were in there every day, doing our workouts. It was kind of an expensive membership, but everyone else's gym seemed to be closed, but not ours. So no, it's the COVID really took the wind out of our sails from kind of these high touch programs. but the, good news, bad news, that was the bad news. The good news was the diabetes program we'd been doing as groups. We put it onto Zoom. We also had getting people from all over the province. And I kind of realized, hey, we could actually do this completely virtually. But if we were going to do virtual care here, we need to think a little bit more deeply around what virtual care means. It's not just the video connection. It can be synchronous, it can be asynchronous, it can be it could be one-on-one, it can be group. You can have text, you can have, exercise, you can have audio, you can have video. There's all sorts of ways that, once you have a digital relationship with somebody, there's all sorts of ways for you to build a program. And what we started to realize was that we could, through building kind of a back end to this program, we could take physician time and, because the problem in lifestyle medicine is often, how do you do that in a 10-minute encounter? And, and so we created a structure where, we can kind of 30x the physician time, or more by, one, kind of amplifying, in groups where you have, you spend an hour with 30 people. So it's only kind of, a couple of minutes per person, but, now that you're in a group, each person gets that hour. So right there, you get that magnification, right? So that was really interesting. And then by putting all of the material online from a video perspective, you were able to, do your best job explaining something once, and then it gets listened to thousands of times, right? And then you can build kind of interactive software modules around that. So that kind of took me down a path of, I realized that during COVID that was possible, but I had a few kind of issues, right? One, my coding skills were never great, and they were definitely outdated. I don't think anyone's going to do this in Visual Basic. So I needed a technical co-founder. And then the other thing was I knew how hard a startup is, right? And I'd gone through that. And so I wanted to find a young CEO that would be, potentially could be, mentored to become a great CEO. So, power of networking, a couple of guys in my network that I had met, years earlier were, initially they started an EMR company when they're 17. And Jason, who's now our CEO, he had reached out to me when he was, second year at Princeton. And he reached out, he said, "Hey, I'm at Princeton and I've got an EMR company and I'm taking the year off, and just got accepted to Y Combinator." And so we chatted about this, and he was thinking about dropping out of Princeton. And I was like, "Hey, like you're 20 years old, you're at Princeton, that's an amazing experience. Don't drop out of it." Right. There'd be lots of companies to start. I think a lot of people probably told him that. So he finished his degree. Their company was pretty successful, but pretty localized. So it didn't grow as big as Wolf did. But they got an offer to sell it last year. And so we approached there kind of right after they got the offer, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And so I told him about, this concept of building this full stack virtual care platform for one clinical problem. And that clinical problem is the most massive clinical problem faced in our society. So it's not like it's not a scale issue here. And it is really around kind of reversing insulin resistance and tackling type 2 diabetes at scale. And so that was the genesis of LifestyleRx. So really kind of, that the silver lining of COVID for us was that we found this approach that we realized could work. It needed a heck of a lot more capabilities than we had at the time. And that's why we started the new company around this.
Mm-hmm. What are your favorite stories that have come out of LifestyleRx so far? Because virtual care had its own horror stories, as well as stories of people receiving care when they otherwise wouldn't be able to. So there must be some, both positive and negative, with your experiences adapting to virtual care.
So I mean, now virtual care is actually, it's a delight. I think in the early stage, of the pandemic, it was, you just couldn't get connections with people, and everybody had had a skill set to learn. What's phenomenal is, we've got people in their 80s in our program that masters, Zoom and all our online components and everything else. The technology no longer gets in the way, but that was kind of, I think at the beginning, everyone was kind of like, oh my goodness, this technology, some of it's just not ready for prime time. But by and large, what's been delightful with it is just, when we do these groups, we have people from all over the province in the groups. So, uh, these are people in places that there's no way that they get this care, right? There's no way that, little community could support a program like this. But we do it across the province. It's open for everybody. So that's been amazing. The other thing that we see is just these transformations that people achieve, are awe-inspiring, right? As a physician, when you prescribe a medication, yeah, I wouldn't describe it as awe-inspiring. You lower somebody's LDL cholesterol with a statin. You've done your job, right? But there's nothing exciting about it.
Yep.
When you
Yep.
guides somebody through a lifestyle change, like I saw somebody this morning who came into our program, 12 weeks ago, hemoglobin A1C of 8.4, wasn't on any medications, wasn't particularly paying attention to things. Today is A1C is 5.6, and
Wow. That's
he's
rapid.
it's incredibly rapid, right? And he's lost weight, he's reversed his insulin resistance markers. He probably still has a degree of insulin resistance, so he's got to stay on the path, obviously. But that's what's possible, right? He's obviously kind of one of the, a super responder perhaps. But you get other stories like, we had a person who was, BMI of 47. So, pretty large lady who was really debilitated by her weight and her osteoarthritis. And so when you're talking around what does she do for exercise, she's like, I can't do anything. Right. And we started to talk about, well, what would be the minimum that she could do? And she said, well, I've got a courtyard and I think I could walk around the courtyard. I said, well, that's great. Well, you think you can do that every day? And she said, well, I'll try. And off she went. And there were a whole bunch of other components, obviously around nutrition and other aspects to our program. Began to lose weight. Blood sugars began to improve. But she kind of stuck with that walking around the courtyard. And that walking around the courtyard became, 10 minutes, became 15 minutes, became a 30-minute walk. And at the 12-week point, I saw her BMI drop from 47 to 40, a massive drop in weight. But the thing that excited me the most was she signed up for a program at the local community center to learn about lifting weights, right? Because week 11 in our program is around resistance training. So this is a person that couldn't exercise at the beginning. And by the end of the program, she's signing up for a program at the community center. And also saying, like one of the things she said to me, I never imagined myself as somebody that would go to a gym. And now I'm excited about it. So clearly kind of, the transformation of how she saw herself during that program was awesome. So, that's the kind of thing as a practitioner that gets, it's just exciting, right? Like you feel really good about that. And, but it's not because you did it. It's more like you're the Sherpa, right? They climb the mountain. You kind of just help point the way for them. And that's the most gratifying part about doing what we're doing. And our job, running LifestyleRx is we're going to be relentless and methodical about insulin resistance. So some people it'll come easily, some people it'll be harder, and we'll have to work in different ways. But we're going to be relentless about trying to find a path for them, right? And my belief is that if you took all the people, out there being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes right now, probably 50 or 60% of those people remission is a very real possibility. And it should be the choice. It should be, that should be the path that they're directed towards.
You say you're relentless, but what does relentless actually look like? I think one of the amazing things you've done is capture that groupthink for the positive to an extent by enabling communities to learn about lifestyle changes to fix or manage insulin resistance together. But what does that relentless focus on insulin resistance actually look like in person? And how do you make this into a modular, or how do you make this to a business model?
Yeah. First of all, part of being relentless with it is understanding what works or doesn't work. Right. And
Yeah.
when we, just having a small example, not even clinical, but when we first started, people onboard themselves, and we wrote this really brilliant onboarding software that they could onboard directly into a physician consultation. But our no-show rate was horrendous. And so we put a patient success team together, and so that every patient would come through in the same onboarding, but it would land them with a patient success person who would explain the program kind of, so I mean, we had lots of stuff explaining it, but we just had a person explaining it. Now no shows are almost unheard of, right? Like we just don't, people come, they're ready to go, and they've done the work. So there are little changes that you make as you go. You just have to have the data. And so you just start to see this works, this doesn't work. And you need to be relentless about trying to improve it, right? So, this works. Can it work 5% better? Can it work 10% better? But the same thing can be applied at the clinical level. So one of the things that we've realized with type 2 diabetes is it's emerging that there are 5 different subtypes of type 2 diabetes. And so this came out of Sweden in around 2018. It's been replicated in, I think, 9 or 10 other studies in different populations. And those subtypes have very different trajectories. And so understanding this, what subtype somebody is, also helps us understand, well, what's the likelihood of remission for this person? And so if they're an insulin, if they have an insulin deficiency subtype, the chance of remission is actually really low. And we need to reframe this for them so that they're not feeling like, there's no point doing what we're going to ask them to do. But the other subtypes, there are differences in terms of, what we need to do from an exercise standpoint, what we need to do from a medication standpoint. And so the back end of what we're building, there's kind of a reason why it's founded by EMR guys, because we're building a bespoke EMR with the data analytics capability that we can slice and dice our data to understand what works and what doesn't work on a clinical level. And then what works or doesn't work in terms of our curriculum. And so we can keep improving it to get kind of that 5% better, 1% better, whatever it takes. And that's what I mean by being relentless. It's just constantly, measuring what you're doing and then coming up with ways to make it work better. And we know, for us, a big, if we have people engaged, if they're engaged in our program, they do really well. So, okay, how do we get people engaged? What excites people? What do we need to do? And there you got to be creative. You got to try different things. And the beautiful part about digital is you can test stuff. You can test, one approach versus another approach, and you can use data to actually guide which you stick with. And so we're applying a lot of that to what we're doing, all with the aim of trying to help more people reverse the insulin resistance that allows them to achieve diabetes remission.
Mhm. So, I mean, it seems like the through line of everything that you've done throughout your career has been to turn medical practices from paper charts and pagers, never mind pagers, paper charts, into EMRs where you can slice and dice the data to achieve better health outcomes for the patients. And you've gotten to where you want to be, at least from my perception. Do you feel like you've succeeded to some extent in your life goal of being able to work with the massive amounts of medical information that are available in clinics now?
We're getting there, right? So, when we were at Wolf, we had a tagline: turning information into better health outcomes.
Yeah.
And when I went to TELUS actually adopted that tagline for TELUS Health for the time it was there. So, and really that is the theme, right? It's turning, the information into better health outcomes. One of the things I learned along the way was, what was disappointing in the EMR journey was, for the most part, I think EMRs unfortunately have created more moral distress for physicians than they have created kind of joy or benefit. And part of that is just that it's harder to use an EMR than it is to use a paper and pen. And by and large, most physicians are recording notes in a very inefficient manner into a record system that they will almost never access again, and nobody will look at that note again. And so that's distressing, right? And at the same time, you're having to fill out more and more forms, and the forms are, they're always awkward in the electronic space. They're not very, you don't see medical forms being done through DocuSign or other kind of streamlined approaches, right? Literally you get something faxed from the pharmacy that in some EMRs you have to print, sign, scan, and send back. Like, oh my God, right? So,
And the fax tag.
yeah. So much, so unfortunately we turned information into, mostly digital, albeit some fax, but mostly digital information. But there was this gap between better health outcomes. One of the things I learned from when we did the innovation work was there's a Harvard Business School prof, Clayton Christensen, who's got this framework, the jobs to be done framework. And his whole thing is that you essentially hire a tool for a job. Like, nobody really wants a drill. What you want is a 1/4-inch hole. So you kind of hire or you use a drill to make a 1/4-inch hole. And in health, I thought that was really interesting to think about these discrete health jobs, but not from the, everything in healthcare, unfortunately, is practitioner centric. So if you go from a patient centric standpoint, let's look at the health job that a person has. So a person with type 2 diabetes has this health job of, I want to live the healthiest possible way so that my diabetes doesn't get worse and maybe it gets better, right? That's a discrete health job. So guess what? If you build a company or an approach around that one health job, it's incredibly powerful, because you're not trying to you're not trying to build something for their knee pain. You're not trying to build something for the rash on their back. You're building something for this one health job. And that's what we've really tried to do here. Now, granted, the health job we picked is it's a big one, right? And so it's got a lot of scope to it. But I think the chances of being successful within a health job of doing that are really high. It's a manageable amount. Whereas, when you're building an EMR for every possible clinical usage out there, the tool becomes a bit like a Swiss Army knife for, you're going to use a Swiss Army knife as a mechanic. Not really, right? As a mechanic, you have custom tools for the job that you're going to do. And I feel like that's kind of one of the things that we've got to see within, EMR spaces, really, tackle it around the health job and build the software around that health job. And ultimately there needs to be some interoperability around the data so that you can move data in and out of different software that are fit for purpose for that particular health job.
Mm-hmm. I agree that the generalist EMR can be quite difficult to navigate to manage multiple different health conditions, because there's so much that you need to do, which leads to cognitive overload. But I can't help but think that there's a bit of irony there, because at the beginning of this conversation, you said that you love being a generalist, but you're creating a specialty software and you're actually just building yourself into a niche of lifestyle and metabolic medicine that in itself is not very generalist.
Well, so look at the name LifestyleRx. It's a general name, right? And so
Fair.
Think how many clinical practice guidelines start with the first
Lifestyle
paragraph
modification.
right?
Fair.
So, we've just picked the biggest health job amongst them all. We have the feeling it'll be a life's work just tackling that one health job. That being said, the infrastructure that we're building can be applied to countless other health jobs out there. And so, you could easily see a LifestyleRx program for cardiovascular health, or for fatty liver, or for depression for that matter. Right. So, there are a lot of different other possibilities for the stack that we're building. But we're really choosing to build it out completely on one health job, in order to understand kind of that full potential.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it makes sense. Metabolic health is a big market and you do need a beachhead to land on. But I mean, you've done amazing work with so many different companies, so many different initiatives so far. that you've been recruited on to the boards of different companies that do specific health jobs, such as Life Labs. So for those of the listeners who may, for example, have had a recent exit or looking at that as the next step in their career trajectory, what does being on the board instead of being on, I guess, the opposite side on the executives actually look like and feel like when you've operated successfully before?
I'm still learning that. um, most of my board experience prior to this has been on startup boards, and then I've done a fair bit of charitable kind of work. Working on different charities board, and I've worked on some public boards, but from a from a public company or Life Labs isn't a public company, but they're from a larger company perspective, it's different, right? And you're there to help advise, and you're there to kind of really help be sure that the company's doing the right things and not missing things. And with Life Labs, it was really interesting because there's a real kind of challenge where there's so much innovation coming in the diagnostic space, kind of either personal diagnostics or point of care diagnostics, or just different ways to be able to measure these things. And then there's kind of the utility grade diagnostics that Life Labs does, where, if you're seeing a patient, you expect that, that complete blood panel to be back, this afternoon, right? And the patient go to the lab, and it's got all the logistics associated with it, but you expect that to work like a utility, right? So on one hand, they've got to be operationally incredibly sound to be able to operate this utility-like function. On the other hand, there's all this innovation coming. And so that really intrigued me. And mainly, I think, from the work I'd done as Chief Innovation Officer at TELUS, it's like, how do those great innovative ideas that are out there, how do they pan out? And which ones will be disruptive to that core business that you're trying to run and that you need to get ahead of, and which ones are going to be distractants? And so that's kind of what I've been interested in there. And I'm just, I'm still kind of learning to, how to have an impact, with them. It's hard for people. I think it's hard for people like me to be on boards, just in that, like, I tend to want to always do stuff. And physicians are really, as physicians, one of our challenges is we form judgments really quickly. Like, we get impression. Yeah. I think, like, what are we designed to do?
Anchor.
We're basically, okay, let's take the information at hand and process that and come up with and let's do something. And at the board level, that's not really the way you should function. You need to be taking a long-term view. You need to be looking at all aspects. You need to be contributing from your perspective, but understanding that there are, and a good board has all these multiple perspectives. And that's the whole point of a board, is to bring in those perspectives. So you kind of realize that, my job in Life Labs board is, physician perspective, innovation perspective, and bringing that in. But there are other perspectives that may not gel with that, and ultimately management runs the company. It's an interesting transition that way, but I'm enjoying it. They're a great group of people, and really impressed with what I've seen there.
That's awesome. Before we close off, I always give this opportunity for guests to plug something, and I'm pretty sure you're going to plug something about LifestyleRx. So you got the floor.
All right. So a couple of things, I guess, is obviously one, if there's anybody out there with type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance, pre-diabetes or metabolic syndrome, kind of any of the related conditions that is looking for help, check our website out, lifestylrx.io. If there are any practitioners out there that are looking for meaningful practice, we are launched in BC. We're launching in Alberta next month, and we're actively recruiting internal medicine docs for Ontario. So if you want to get in early on something that I think is going to be really exciting, and I think it's going to be a really impactful journey, and please reach out to me, and I'd love to connect.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.